Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning. It depends on where you are. This is not live. Depends when you are as well. My name is John Michael here at the Context is Everything Media Network. Another episode of What's Under Your Hood? What's Under Your Hood? Where we look into a world history textbook, and not just an ordinary world history textbook, a well-maintained world history textbook from the year 2001. So you're getting a little bit of a perspective before a major global changing event. So this is the final world history textbook perspective before a massive world-changing event. Copyright 2001. So you'd assume for the 2001 school year, right? Major world-changing event in the year 2001. This textbook is from before that. Right before it. So that doesn't mean much, but it makes it a little bit more interesting for me as the reader to just pay attention to what is being shared when we lived in a world that was a little bit different, a lot of it different. I mean, technology and all that really skyrocketed in the past couple of years. This is a good color on me. I should wear more of this. But that's besides the point. So we were talking about the Fertile Crescent yesterday. And did we have any homework? I remember thinking, I don't like these homework questions, and there's some good stuff going on here. So let's just do a little summary, pick up on where we are. We're in Chapter 2, Section 3, City-States of Ancient Sumer. And Sumer is in the Fertile Crescent, which is the land that is interlocked between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. So the land in the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Gonna have a lot of silt. Gonna have a lot of fertile dirt. Gonna have a lot of crops. And I would assume, based off of the way agriculture works, probably gonna have a number of folks there as well. Number of folks living in Sumer, ancient Sumer. So why don't we just get into it? Geography of the Fertile Crescent. If you look at the map on the next page, which is this, but don't worry about it, you will notice an arc of land that curves from the Persian Gulf to the eastern Mediterranean coast. The dark, rich soils and golden wheat fields earned it the name the Fertile Crescent. So people would live there, people would find it to be hospitable, and thus, over time, became more and more inhabited. Based off of recent revelations, I think that we can probably pretty safely assume that the Fertile Crescent was inhabited by advanced civilizations before this book is going to tell you, because of recent revelations, one of which is just the analysis of water erosion on the Sphinx. This is strange. Water erosion? Water erosion implies water. The Sphinx is in the desert. When was there water in the desert? Longer ago than we thought there was civilizations there. Longer ago than we thought the thing was built in the first place. And also the paws on it are really big and the face is really small. It looks like, if you look up a diagram, you could probably type it in, like projected original casting of the Sphinx. And you'll see like a big dog face on it. And you'll say, well, that looks a lot better than the tiny head on the Sphinx with the giant paws. Which, based off of the precision and care that went into the building of the pyramids, which are like perfectly aligned, like the pyramid on the summer solstice, like the sun disk in the sky is perfectly on like solstice. is perfectly above the tip of the Great Pyramid. So they were a precise people, and I would assume, based off of their precision, that they would build the Sphinx. If they built it from scratch, they would build it proportionally. Like if it's going to have dog paws that are super long, then if there's going to be a human face on it, the human face will be proportionate to those dog paws, because otherwise it looks a little odd. I think the implication is that they didn't build it, and that it was there before, and they changed it, the Egyptians. And that there was a civilization before, and there was a global cataclysm that kind of cleared the slate clean, and the Egyptians said, well, here we are. The land between the rivers. The first known civilization of the Fertile Crescent was uncovered in the 1800s in Mesopotamia. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers define Mesopotamia, which mean between the rivers in Greek. Interesting. Floods and irrigation. Just as control of the Nile was vital to Egypt, control of the Tigris and Euphrates was key to the development of Mesopotamia. The rivers frequently rose in terrifying floods that washed away topsoil, destroyed mud brick villages. One story of the long Sumerian narrative poem, the Epic of Gilgamesh, tells of a great flood that destroyed the world. Archaeologists have indeed found evidence of this catastrophic flood that devastated the Fertile Crescent some 4,900 years ago, as I said yesterday, and to the point that I was just making. Global cataclysm clears the slate clean. The implication would be that the Sphinx existed before the flood, but it was a product of a previous civilization that we don't know anything about because it was completely wiped off the face of the earth by a giant flood, which was also mentioned in the Bible with Noah's Ark and the monkeys and the alpacas on his boat, 2x2. Not all fairy tales. Maybe they are. But I think that there's a percentage chance that they're not all fairy tales. And that needs to be considered. The percentage chance that things aren't fairy tales. That we think are fairy tales, like Noah's Ark. Might. And science would kind of stand on the side of it being real. And there's some interesting information on that. I'll talk to you. Leave a comment below if you want me to talk more about it. I'll do some research and I'll talk more about it. Channel the full floods. They use the things. They make irrigation. Thus, they can control where cities pop up. Yada, 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 yada. The first cities around 3200 BC. The Sumerian cities emerged in southern part of Mesopotamia. The Sumerians had few natural resources, but they made the most of what they had. They lacked building materials such as timber or stone, so they built with earth and water. They made bricks of clay shaped in wooden molds and dried in the sun. Trade through the rich Sumerian cities. Traders sailed along the river and risked the dangers of desert travel to carry goods to distant regions. Archaeologists have found goods from as far away as Egypt and India in the rubble of Sumerian cities. Sumerian civilization. The rival Sumerian city-states often battled for control of land and water. For protection of people, turned to courageous and resourceful war leaders. Over time, these war leaders evolved into hereditary rulers. Government and society. We have a word here, vocabulary, that we brought up yesterday. Hierarchy. Each Sumerian city-state had distinct social hierarchy, or system of ranks. The highest class included the ruling family, leading officials, and high priests. A small middle class was made up of lesser priests and scribes. The middle class was also included merchants and artisans. Artisans who practiced the same trade, such as weavers or carpenters, lived and worked in the same street. Okay, so it was like artisan way. Have you noticed in your hometown that there's or in a breasting town near your hometown, there is a street that has a lot of car dealerships? The Auto Mile. It looks like they had that for artisans back in Sumeria. Role of women in Sumerian society changed over time. In the earliest Sumerian myths, a mother goddess reflected the honored role of mothers in farming communities. As large city-states emerged with warrior leaders at their heads, male gods replaced the mother goddess. Still, in the early city-states, wives of rulers enjoyed special powers and duties. Some supervised palace workshops and ruled for the king when he was absent. Over time, men gained more power and wealth. Women became more dependent on men, yet women continued to have legal rights. Well-to-do women engaged in trade and owned property. Ahead of their time. Or just one of the cultural things that are different from place to place. Because I also feel like they stoned people to death. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Sumerian religion. Like most ancient peoples, the Sumerians were polytheistic, worshipping many gods. These gods were thought to control every aspect of life, especially the force of nature. Sumerians believed that gods and goddesses behaved like ordinary people. They ate, drank, married, and raised families. Although the gods favored truth and justice, they were also responsible for violence and suffering. To Sumerians, their highest duty was to keep these divine beings happy and thereby ensure the safety of their city-state. Each city built a ziggurat. Ziggurat. Look at that ziggurat. Type that in on Google. Type that in on DuckDuckGo. Type that in on Microsoft Edge. Ziggurat, a pyramid temple that soared toward the heavens. At its top stood a shrine to the chief god or goddess of that city. To win the favor of the gods, the people prayed and offered sacrifices of animals, grain, and wine. They also celebrated holy days with ceremonies and processions. In one ritual, the king went through a symbolic wedding to Inanna, the life-giving goddess of love. This rite was meant to ensure the prosperous New Year. Happy New Year. Should old acquaintance be forgot? Like the Egyptians, the Sumerians believed in an afterlife. However, they saw the underworld as a grim place from which there was no release. One character of the Epic of Gilgamesh describes the underworld as the place where they lived on dust. Their food is mud, ... and they see no light, living in blackness on the door and doorbolt, deeply settled dust. The Epic of Gilgamesh. This view of the afterlife contrasts with the Egyptian vision of a happy field of food. Differences in geography may explain this contrast. The floods of the Tigris and Euphrates were less regular and more destructive than those of the Nile. As a result, Sumerians may have developed a pessimistic view of the world. That is called an educated guess, which is good. Based off of the Epic of Gilgamesh talking about the afterlife and the view of the afterlife for the Sumerians, the publisher is making an inference, an educated guess, that since it's a grim view of the afterlife, and since they were prone to floods that were destructive, that the Sumerians were pessimistic. That's a reasonable guess. It's an educated guess, but it is, based off of that evidence, a guess. Right? Am I wrong? Give me some other evidence and then we can prove it, but it's an educated guess as of now. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But let's define what it is. Is this aggressive when I put one finger up? Maybe I should do whole hand. But it's aggressive when they do. Advances in learning. In 3200 BC, the Sumerians had invented what may be the earliest known form of writing. This type of writing was later called cuneiform. Cuneiform, from the Latin word cuneos, or wedge, because it involved using reed pen to make wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets. Cuneiform grew out of a system of pictographs that priests used to record goods brought to temple storehouses. Later, priests developed symbols to represent more complete thoughts, or complicated thoughts. As their writing evolved, the Sumerians were able to use it to not only record grain harvests, but also myths, prayers, laws, treaties, and business contracts. Okay. Now we're cooking. Primary source evidence. You can see, if we got any writing, that'd be cool. I'd like to see it. I guess Epic of Gilgamesh is that. It was written in cuneiform? Sumerian scribes had to go through years of difficult schooling to acquire their skills. Discipline was strict. Untidy copying or talking in class could be punished by caning. See, I told you. Gifted students went on to gain a wide range of knowledge about religion, medicine, mathematics, geography, astronomy, and literature. Over the centuries, Sumerian scholars made advances in mathematics. To measure and solve problems of calculation, they developed basic algebra and geometry. They based their number system on 6, dividing the hour into 60 minutes and the circle into 360 degrees. As we still do today, priests study the skies, recording the movement of heavenly bodies. This knowledge enabled them to make accurate calendars, which are so essential to a farming society. Looking ahead, we're almost coming to our end of today's lesson. Thank you for joining along. This is Context is Everything Media Network. That's Context is Everything Media Network. Today's episode, What's Under Your Hood, number 6. Reading a 2001 textbook of world history, published weeks before a world-changing event that happened in the beginning of the school year of 2001. So it's kind of interesting to see the perspective back then before a lot of changes occurred. Not only because of that event that happened in September of 2001, but also because of technology forging forward in a really exponentially fast formation from 2001 to today. A lot of technological advances that we see as the people, as the public. Looking at armies of conquering people swept across Mesopotamia and overwhelmed the Sumerian city-states. Often the newcomers settled in the region and adopted ideas from the Sumerians. The myths and gods of these people became mingled with those of Sumer. Later peoples also elaborated on Sumerian literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh. The newcomers adopted cuneiform and their own languages and helped spread Sumerian learning across the Middle East. Building on Sumerian knowledge of the constellations and planets. Later, Mesopotamian astronomers developed ways to predict eclipses of the sun and the moon. By means of various peoples who conquered the Middle East, Sumerian knowledge passed on to the Greeks and Romans. They, in turn, had a powerful impact on the development of the Western world. Indeed, they did. I was thinking ziggurat, the definition of it, a pyramid temple that soared towards the heavens for the favored god, is definitely something. I mean, I guess it's kind of sensible if you have a high point that would be your closest point to the heavens. So a high point would be. But the Greeks did that in Athens with the which one is that? The Parthenon? Is that the Parthenon in Athens? Leave in the comments below if that's the Parthenon in the middle of Athens on the hill in the middle of the city. Pretty interesting stuff here. The Egyptians, the Sumerians, the ziggurats, the cuneiform little pictures. Here's pictures of the little pictures. No, not that. Pictures of the little pictures. In cuneiform, you can pause the screen here, take your notes, because we have a question here for homework that I haven't read yet. How did geography influence the city-state of Sumer? How is Sumerian society organized? Describe how 2 Sumerian accomplishments influenced later peoples. That's the one. Describe 2 ways or 2 things that the Sumerians discovered that influenced later peoples. Do it. All right, what's under your hood? Context is Everything Media Network, John Michael Monroy, episode 6. I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, or whatever. And join me next time. I will continue to read through this textbook until I finish it. That's the goal. I think I can do it. Page 36 or 37 of 1007.